All right, guys, check it out. Today on American Heritage Garage, we are going to dig into the 40 Chevy. Before I get into anything, I'm going to lay out all the parts. The guy whose car this is, he had some parts he sent along with the car, and I already made a trip to Napa and picked up everything I think I'm going to need. So we're going to look through all that stuff, and then we're going to prop the old hood up here and dig in. Like I said, we're going to work on basic tune-up stuff, got some stuff to do with the brakes, a little bit of wiring stuff. Double check the fuel system, but I think this thing's going to, knock on wood, not give me too many problems. So let's get at it. Got everything laid out on the top of the toolbox here. Here we got master cylinder and wheel cylinder rebuild kits. So we got 4 wheel cylinders, front and rear, all drum. Master cylinder kit here. Over here we have a 12 volt voltage regulator for when we do the 6 to 12 volt conversion. A ballast resistor, which we might not need because the IC14 ignition coil is internally resisted. So we'll see how all that pans out. Over here we got cap rotor and a condenser. We'll touch back on that in a second. New Autolite spark plugs. We have a carb rebuild kit. Spark plug wires here. Back here it looks like he's got the top hold down for the battery. He's got some miscellaneous stuff, set of keys. Starter motor wire kit. I'll look into that and see what the deal is and why that needs to be rewired. He does have an electronic ignition. It's an upgrade. We'll see how that all works out. I'm not going to mess with this stuff until it runs. So once we get it running, we'll see how all this is going to work out. And I'm not going to do the 12 volt conversion until after it runs too. So, and then last thing he sent here is a 12 volt high torque starter made for the 216 and the 235. So again, that will get dealt with when we do the 12 volt conversion. So pretty much that's where we're going to start. Nothing beats having a pile of parts and start tearing stuff apart and putting stuff back together. So we're going to jump in there and get at it. So as you can see, I replaced the hood prop, aka shovel, from yesterday with this handy dandy Libman mop handle. So we'll take another quick look up under here, a little better light. Not congested at all. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spark plugs and spark plug wires. No problem. Battery box down there. Battery cables and everything look to be in pretty good shape. Again, this wire dangling, I don't know what that's for. We got a fuel pump down here. Fingers are crossed that that's going to work for me. Oil fill here. What else? I mean, new radiator hoses. Again, this thing's got a heater, so we got some new heater hoses. Everything looks to be okay. Again, we'll knock on wood on that. Looking over here at everything. The one thing I forgot to show you yesterday is the intake manifold must have had a crack in it. So that's my favorite stuff right there. Some JB Weld, whatever, it works, and it's hard to weld cast, so I don't know. As long as this thing up and goes, I'm happy. My fuel lines are doing okay up here. I checked underneath under the tank there, and they looked okay. We got an external reservoir here for the oil. Probably has some sort of filtration device. That is not a factory option. Voltage regulators down, where the heck is it? Right there. I think that's it. I gotta look some more. Pretty sure that's it, tucked up under that case there. Right there. Yeah, so we're gonna dig into this thing. Check on the carb here. Like I said, it's a Carter. There's all of our numbers. From what we can see, might have to do the old whiteout trick on there. Spray a little brake cleaner. Also, up on this tag, right there might be some beneficial numbers. So yeah, we're gonna dig into this. One thing I didn't show you yesterday. Look at the play in the steering wheel. You gotta hang on to her, but she'll go down the road. So I'm gonna get cracking here. All right, so the first thing I did was I marked all the spark plug wires. I just went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way to the back. I'm 100% sure that's not the firing order, and it's really not necessary, but since I didn't dig through and find the firing order yet, this is just one way for me to keep this organized. Even though I'm replacing all these, I'll just know where they go, so it's not a big deal. So, from what I can see here, everything looks halfway decent inside the distributor. So that's a good sign to start off with. I'm not going to pull the distributor out because there's really no reason. That starter is going to be a heck of an upgrade compared to that monster. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to need to yank that out. I will set the engine at top dead center and probably reset the points just to double check them eventually here before we try. So I'll go ahead and get the plugs out and take a look at those real quick, and we'll go from there. Grabbing myself a ratchet. Most of your older spark plugs are pretty standard at 5/8. Some were 13/16. Now there are some metric kind. I might have just be eating my words here because these are 13/16. So I forgot this thing is like a tractor motor. So we'll walk over to the old toolbox, grab the 13/16. Amazingly enough, I still have spark plug sockets with the little rubber insert. That never happens. Usually they get stuck and lost somewhere, so these help a lot. Let's see how tight these are. Well, that one wasn't very tight. Set these all out. Man, these things are like brand new. I might get to take a lot of this stuff back. See how that happens? See, it comes out every time. These are ACs. These are in pretty good shape. This thing really might not be that much effort here. Well, like I said, we'll get all these out and double check the gaps on them and everything once I figure out what the gap will be. But yeah, somebody has tried to get this thing operating at some point in the somewhat recent past here. Granted, they didn't tighten the spark plugs down very tight, but I could almost, if I tried hard enough, get those out with my hands. Look, I lost it again. I'll have to put a little dielectric on there or something. And again, all right. This is a very interesting engine. This whole almost cover the water jackets or something. It's really like an old tractor engine. That's what gives me a lot of hope that this thing shouldn't give too much problem. Most work we might do on this thing is a little bit of wiring cleanup and mess around with that electronic ignition and see what that's all about. Give it a shot, because this is This is looking pretty good. All right. I've got the spark plugs all laid out on the bench here. In my opinion, they've never even been, the vehicle hasn't been run since these have been in here. They look pretty clean. We'll see if we can get this to focus in on it a little. The electrode and everything doesn't have any sort of carbon or anything. There's a little bit of rust on the base of these, but that's just from them sticking out of the engine block. So what we're going to do here real quick is double check all the gap. The factory manual for the 1940 216 says 35 thousandths. Whoops, gotta be careful doing that. But a few things I've read says to run them up to 40 thousandths because that just gives it the ideal spark. So whatever, 5 thousandths makes a little bit of a difference. We'll go ahead and set them at 40. I will end up changing these when I add this electronic ignition. Most likely try to put a little hotter plug in, but we'll just see what happens. I'll have to find a good recommendation for plug. So all of my feeler gauges only go up to 35 thousandths. So what you can do is double them up. So I got 2 of them here. I got them both set the gauge out at 20 on each of them. So that's an even 40. It'll pinch together to get a good fit. So you just want to take the gauge, run it through. You don't want it tight, you don't want it loose, you want it just snug. That's a little off. We'll put just a little bit on it. Now to move these, there's a couple ways you can do it. You want to be careful. They move easily. So you can use the end of the gauge like this and just bend up a little bit. Small increments. Okay, so you want just a little bit of drag in there. That's good. That one's pretty good. We'll give it just a little bit. Okay. That one's a little snug. So what I do if you go a little much, just a couple taps. A little bit goes a long way, so don't go nuts. These were almost set right at 40. They're all pretty good. That one's a little tight. So once we get this done, I'm going to put these plugs back in, put a little anti-seize on them and everything, tighten them up just right. Then we'll put the new cap and rotor on, but we'll test we'll double check the points. Very simple. You run the engine around until there's a cam in the points. I'll show you that in just a second here. And once that's on the high spot and the points are open all the way, you set them to the gap. I believe it's 16 thousandths, but I'll take a look. I have these feeler gauges that are a little bit different. If you can see, they're narrow at the end as opposed to the wide ones. They're a little better for setting points. So we'll jump over there real quick, check that out. Down here looking in at the distributor, here's your points right here. Okay, your contact points. They open and close. So the gap you'll be looking at is in between these two contacts right here. So if you look on the little cam of the distributor here, as this rotates, there's high spots. So you want to get the engine over to these open all the way up on top of one of these high spots, and we're looking for a 16 thousandths gap right here, and that's the way to set the points. You can loosen them if you need to make adjustments. Okay, so at full open, you want the feeler gauge to go in there with some resistance, not tight, not loose, just kind of mild resistance. So we'll go ahead and crack those open, or run the engine over and get it up on a high spot, and we'll go from there. I think I got you in close enough so you can see what I'm doing here. So if you loosen up this screw right here and you put your screwdriver on the other screw, That's how you make your movements in the points. That helps at least. So we're going to go 16 thousandths. Get that spread out a little bit there. See, what you don't want is you don't want the gauge to create the gap. That feels pretty good right there. We'll cinch it down and double check it real quick. I'm going to take a little more out of it. So this is all very fine pinpoint type stuff here. About back where it was. It seems like as I'm tightening this hold down screw, it wants to tighten me back up, or loosen me back up. We're going to tighten that and call it good. That should work. So the points are set. We can get the spark plugs back in. Rotor's brand new, so that can go back in the box, back to Napa. We'll get the spark plugs back in. The firing order is 153624. And the cylinder orientation is front to back 1 through 6. So real simple for putting the cap on and getting everything in the right spot. First thing you got to do is set the engine to top dead center on the #1 cylinder. So we went ahead and ran the engine over and got the #1 cylinder up at the top on the compression stroke. That's also important. So then you set your rotor on, and wherever your rotor points on the cap, as far as underneath here, so whichever terminal the rotor lands on is the #1 cylinder. Okay, so a real simple way to do that, if you'll see right down here, I made a white mark on the distributor housing itself, and we'll go ahead and set this in the right spot like that. And just by setting it here, we can see that here's our #1 cylinder. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put all the spark plugs in, get them tight, and we'll put the wires on, and that portion of the ignition system will be complete. Then we have to hunt down the wire that comes from the ignition switch to this terminal, the positive terminal on the coil. I think one of the hardest things going to be about that is that any wires that we have under here don't have a whole lot of color left. They've almost all gone this grayish, whitish, brownish color. So we'll see what we can find. So let me get this cap buttoned up and the plugs in, and we'll go hunt some wires. So here's where we're at with the ignition wire that needs to get connected to the battery side, the positive side of the coil here. This coming out of this contraption here, this is the ignition wire, the 12 volt that comes off the ignition. The problem is this was some kind of different setup at one point, and that's what this cap is for, because this just is stupid. And I can see, because there's so much spring in this, why it ended up pulling off of the clip here. The problem I'm finding is that down in this guy, the insulation, the cloth insulation in there is pretty degraded. I'm worried that we're going to get a short on this metal, flexible metal here. So I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do, because that piece of flexible metal goes directly into the back of the ignition switch. So we may have to, I don't know, come up with something, either somehow bypass it, or I might have to get a new ignition switch. So we're kind of stuck with that. We got everything set up as far as the plug wires go. caps on, rotors in, all that stuff, firing orders right. Double check my timing marks, we're good there. So at least that portion's done. Yeah, the good thing is we're going to go ahead and reuse the plug wires to cap and the rotor. The points are fine, so we can send some of that stuff back to Napa that we just looked at a little bit ago. So we'll save a little money on that side of things. So I'm going to do a little hunting around and see what I can come up with. I'm a little concerned that the wiring on this overall may be an issue. You know, this thing isn't really fused very well. And the last thing I want is there to be a fire. So we're just going to have to keep our eyes open for that and try to correct any wiring issues that we can see openly. The dash is pretty packed full underneath with wires that are in equally as not great shape. So I really don't want to touch anything if I don't have to. And I really don't want to put a wiring harness in this thing. And I'm sure the gentleman who owns this car doesn't want me to have to put a wiring harness in it. So I don't know. We'll keep our eyes open and see what we come up with. So for now, we're going to stall out, I think, while I do some research on this ignition switch and see what I can come up with. We might jump into the brakes or the fuel system. The carb is going to get rebuilt, and like I said, I'm going to rebuild the master cylinder and all the wheel cylinders. So yeah, we'll go from there, and we'll see what we dig up next. So that's where I'm going to leave it today, guys. We got some pretty good work done on the ignition system. Somebody tried really hard to get this thing running. At one point, all new tune-up stuff, which is great for the current owner. I don't believe he was the one that did it, but I honestly don't know. But everything's in really good shape. Everything's clean so far. There hasn't been any major problems until we hit that ignition wire issue. I figured at some point something was going to happen like that. You can't win them all. I didn't think this thing would be as simple as putting a battery and gas in it and it's starting up. So I'm going to do some internet digging. Best thing to do as far as I can think. Probably end up replacing the ignition switch. It shouldn't be a real big deal. There's like 2 wires and then that cable looking thing that pulls through with the wire coming through it. Unless I can come up with a better option, which you never know. It's really hard to climb up under the dash. I'm not the littlest guy in the world, and that seat does not, from what I can tell, move back. So it's a little tight when you're trying to crawl in and look. So I might have to do some of the good old-fashioned lay on the seat upside down, feet hanging over the back of the seat thing. So we're going to wrap this up for today and call at least the initial tune-up a success. Plenty of other stuff to do on this thing. I'm going to run through the whole fuel system, check the lines, pull the tank most likely, clean everything out, make sure all the wiring's good. Part of the 12-volt conversion is we need to put a resistor in line of the electricity going to the wire going to the gauge. Man, I can't talk today. You got to resist that down when you go from 6 volt to 12 volt. So that's something we'll do when we do our conversion. And I keep saying 12 volt and 12 volt battery and all that, and I keep forgetting that this thing's 6 volt right now, so don't mind that. But yeah, we're gonna keep rolling right along, and this thing, I don't know, I got good feelings about it, so I'm hoping that we can get it finished up pretty soon and get this thing rolling. So we'll see. But as always, until next time, we'll see you guys out here at American Heritage Garage.